Welcome to the Arts Lunch. I'm Jennifer Oz Freeman. I'm the Assistant Professor and Program Director for Theology and the Arts at United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities, and really excited to have one of our current students, Dustin Wilsor, telling us about a project he recently completed for the History of Arts and Theology class at United. So without any other further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Dustin.
Thanks, Jennifer. So this was my final art project for History of Art and Theology, and it was a little bit bigger than probably was ever expected. This is the whole series. One day I was sitting in my house and I looked at my husband and I said, "Do you think it is a thing to burn images into wood? Can you do that?" And he said, "Sure, why not?" And so I looked it up, and it is an art called pyrography. If you were to translate it, it would literally mean fire writing. And you use a tool that gets red hot, and you literally put it onto wood and it burns and chars and scars the wood. So even if you were to then strip all this paint off, you would never be able to get rid of the image. I started, this was my first initial inspiration was this image of Darnella Fraser. And I actually did it for a project that my church was working on. I looked at modern day saints of the time of the pandemic. So anyone who was influential or died in the time of the pandemic we were looking at, and I did this image of Darnella and then her cell phone up here in the corner, capturing George Floyd's death. I put her in front of a thin blue line flag, and added this side wound of Christ imagery here into the thin blue line, kind of symbolizing how the blue line is crushing the life out of this side wound here and squeezing the life's blood out of it, and kind of symbolizing how that is also happening to our country every time we kill someone government sanctioned. I wish that you could see in person, because there's some really cool texture on her hair that is just really hard to capture with a photo. There's that. There's the hands of God here in her cell phone footage. And then the cruciform halo around George and the regular halo around Darnella, symbolizing, in case you didn't get that I was calling George Floyd Jesus in this scenario. My next one was then inspired after Eugene Goodman was awarded the Medal of Congress for his valor during the January 6th events. It's much smaller, just 8x10. But I made the halo the actual coin that will eventually be pressed to commemorate his receipt of this. And I gave him obviously stigmata and side wound imagery here. This one, again, January 6th inspired. Took me a long time. This was one of the longer pieces that I spent time working on. It is truly mixed media. I've got like all sorts of different kinds of paint. All of this down here at the bottom with the angels and the kind of descending into hell situation is all done in oil, while everything above on Earth is done in watercolor, other than like the lettering is all in acrylic. And it was inspired both by the events of January 6th, the death of Brian Sicknick, this haunting image of the police officer who was being crushed in the door of the Capitol. And I was inspired then by, this is Dionysius's painting of Jesus ascending from hell. And so I intentionally used this as a model for what the look of this would be. And then on the news, I was struck by kind of these pictures of, like a gallows with the Capitol in the background, and, these bastardizations of patriotism on that day. All of these dots down here, I specifically used what my paint calls flesh tone, and also then white, to symbolize all of the white people who were doing this, and not a lot of diversity, whereas then the people in hell are people of color that were killed. Oh, and in person on this revolving door that I created here, there's actually clear plastic, so you can see the light catches it and it'll reflect back like glass. Again, the hands of God are here, and I used the shadowing of the noose to create a cross, to give the image of a cross. The red from the flag is running out like blood. It's the point there. And I gave stigmata and crown of thorns to the bald eagle on top of the Capitol, again symbolizing the kind of the injury to the country as a whole, not just the people who were there. I knew I wanted to do something for Matthew Shepard, and I wasn't sure what to do until I remembered the image of the crucifixion of, is that St. Andrew? And I thought, oh, how that X cross, as opposed to the T-shaped cross, is notable in this crucifixion, and it looks like a split rail fence. So I created a split rail fence out of that crossed X, and again used this as my kind of inspiration for the look of this. I purposefully put blood all over his face, because in the police report, when Matthew Shepard was found before he was dead, the officer who found him said that his face was completely covered in blood except for the places where tears had washed the blood away. And so I covered his face in blood and then took clean water and dripped it from his eyes to make the red paint run down his body like that. He wasn't found naked like I made him in this picture, but I chose to portray him as naked to show the vulnerability that he would have been experiencing in that moment. And also I used this, it's almost like the eclipse during the crucifixion here in the sky, but also kind of giving the idea of a halo here, even though it's not traditional, and the angel coming to crown him. This was an interesting one. I became inspired by this after doing some personal fun reading on television history, and learned everything that went in from the transition of Sesame Street from PBS to HBO, and how it, because of that, the audience that Sesame Street was originally intended for can no longer afford to watch Sesame Street because they don't have HBO. And what, like, the kind of deep and intricate injustice that that actually is, because these children who can afford private preschool suddenly are able to get this free resource that people who might not be able to afford it can't get anymore. So I used, the famous Lord's Supper painting and put the characters of Sesame Street into it, and then I actually carved this. This image is 2 inches thick, and I carved the HBO logo into the actual image to give it depth and to purposefully interrupt the actual image. Kind of talk about monetization of things that should be free. Triptych of women who make a change, the Holy Trinity of women who make a change: Rosa Parks, Ruby Bridges, and Kamala Harris. And I wanted them to all be separate panels to show their individuality, but then have it obviously be one picture that tells a story of progress, and how neither, all of them did something important, but together they did something amazing. And with the hands of God again. And this is Rosa's actual inmate number that she's holding here, sitting on the bus. This was a picture that I found of Ruby just kind of standing in a classroom somewhere, smiling. And obviously this has been kind of a famous meme of Kamala after they won the election. This is a massive piece that I spent weeks and weeks and weeks on. It's 4 feet high by 3 feet wide. It is, again, 2.5 inches thick, and it's carved into as well. It was inspired by another project that I did in art history, our very first project, where we had to just describe a piece that we found in a museum somewhere. And so this is it here on the right side. It's called Our Savior in a Dungeon. There's a lot of statues of this. It's either called Midnight Savior or Our Lord in a Dungeon, Our Savior in a Dungeon. That kind of language is always the name of these. But there's this whole exhibit in Russia, of these different kinds of statues of Jesus waiting in a dungeon to be crucified. And I thought of C.C. McDonald and being sent to a men's prison for a murder that she committed in self-defense, and not being allowed access to her hormone treatments. And I thought, that sounds exactly like a Midnight Savior to me. And so I wanted to put her into this place. So I created a big part of what strikes me about this statue is the light play. So I wanted to actually set her back into the painting. So all of this is quite deep into the the actual material to create shadow play depending on where you're standing, and to put her behind these bars that I burnt in. You can see her right eye here is bloodshot and bruised from battle. I've given her scars and injuries on her arms and skin. And all of this is done using different colors of wood stain. Well, with the exception of the cruciform halo here is copper leaf. And then some of these, the letters, if you look really closely on the door here that Jesus is behind, those are Greek letters, kind of written in a different shade of blue. Took me a long time to actually realize that, looking at it. And so I added that in here as well to just call back to, again, in case you weren't clear on who I was saying I think she is in this image. And then finally, it all leads up to this 139 lashes of John Lewis, where I have depicted him underneath the Edmund Pettus Bridge, being beaten by the police. And then in the negative space here, I've written the names of, on April 15th of this year, it was the 139 most recent people of color who had been killed by the police. Obviously, it's out of date now, but I used, and then so here I have Cairo behind John Lewis with the instruments of crucifixion. So here's the cat of nine tails with silver leaf as the barbs, nails into the side of the tie there, a crown of thorns on the row, and here's the spear that pierced the side. And then you can also see I gave, the places where he's injured, and you can see the resulting blood on the stick also. Hands of God. And then I used the bridge as another halo to go over all of the names of the people who have died but aren't pictured. And the gold that I used on there is intended for like antiquing of furniture. So it's very, very thick, and I could pile it on and give it this kind of texture as well to make it feel a little bit more dirty, like a bridge would be, really. And that's it. Questions, comments, concerns?
Dustin, I definitely want to know kind of what maybe some of the responses in your wider audience. You said you'd done one as part of a church activity. First of all, this is wonderful. This is amazing work. But I'd be curious to know, in that church context or even wider audiences outside of United, some of the response you've gotten. What your plans are also for showing this in more places.
So most of the people who have seen it are people who are going to tell me good things. So
yeah, I'm just wondering, I'm asking that question because just knowing from the whole time we've been through with all of what's going on, learning about different friends who I'm like, okay, we're on the opposite spectrum. This is not going to be good conversation.
Right. Yeah, most of the people who've seen it are pretty close friends who are, if they were going to say something bad about it, it would be in a way to try and give me suggestion on how to make it better, but likely to say good things. But I I do have a desire to show it somewhere, and I don't know what those plans are, but I feel like I put a lot of work into it, and it kind of something that struck me as I was telling Jennifer, as I was doing this, I started thinking about, went to a museum exhibit, and I thought, most like major works of art, when you read the description, they say, Da Vinci was doing this when he was experimenting with X technique, right? Something he had never done before, but he just wondered if he could do it. And that's very much what happened here. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know you even could burn images into wood. And then I got like a beginner's, I think I have it right here. Learn to burn. I bought from Amazon.
That's awesome.
And I did. I learned to burn. I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I'm doing it the way that works for me. And so yeah, I am very excited to learn it, to show it to other people. The one image, which is this one that I did share with my church. Let's see, it's this one. Got a lot of good response, right? Like, I wasn't the only person who did a piece of art for this this study that we did, but everybody else had like gotten their board primed, and I stripped all the primer off to burn it. Like I did something very different than what other people did. So it's neat just to kind of see it as part of that other series as well, to be able to kind of pull this out of this and say, oh, this is also part of that, is also a neat thing about this one image.
I'll ask you a follow-up question later. I don't want to take up all the question time.
I was wondering, Dustin, if you could talk about the process of like, so some of these, if I'm remembering from last semester, for a lot of them, you kind of like just had a picture in your head. Like, it was kind of like, it sounded like you were kind of receiving some pictures and you're like, oh, this is the thing that I'm doing. So it wasn't, because I guess I'm partly thinking about the burning technique and then how you plan something, because it's not, like you said, you can't really remove stuff once you get into it unless you start carving it out or whatever. So it's like, once you start doing it, it's there. So are you sketching things out or doing like a thumbnail sketch beforehand, or how's your planning going?
I did a pencil sketch of every one of these. And then it didn't always end up looking like the pencil sketch. Oftentimes as I was doing the real, what would become the realized image, I got more inspiration. And for instance, you can actually see the result of that in this image, because at first I thought that I was going to just make the whole star field her cell phone and actually scatter stars about it. And then I realized that I thought that wasn't going to be clear, and I actually needed to see the actual cell phone, not just the image that would be on the screen. And it also occurred to me that the video that was recorded in portrait, not landscape. So I wanted to do that too. So I had already burned the image from the cell phone onto the star field before I made that choice. So then I blurred out the edges from around where I made the cell phone, kind of like you see on the news when they show a portrait video and they have to blur out the sides so that there's something to fill up the rest of the screen. But then something like this was literally, I received this image and I sketched and burned and painted this image all in the course of like 5 hours.
Yeah, because you used these, this was became your final project for the history of arts and theology class. And whereas like some other folks were doing like one original work, you created an entire series, and this kind of like, it was like a much bigger project. And it felt like, it seemed like once it got started, you were like, oh, I have these things that there was like a kind of like, I have to make
Yes,
this
it was a lot like that.
body.
And I realized this was going to be my final project very early on in the class. And so I was able to continue to like learn something new in class and then be like, oh my gosh, that would be really cool. I have a whole idea of a book of Kells and Greta Thunberg and like a thing that I want to make, but it's very intensive. Like it would be a sculpture and I don't know how to sculpt it. I'll be like, but before the statue of the little dancer, he had never made a sculpture either. So
I'm curious with kind of your referencing of certain images. Are those ones that you were seeing? Were you seeing those during the class or in your own readings, or things that you were just kind of drawn towards before your idea came at the same time? Or did you intentionally go back to say, okay, what images in art history are kind of inspiring my format or layout and design? I'm curious about that just because it's really interesting images that you're referencing and being inspired by.
So this one was the first time that had happened. And I was already familiar with this image before art history class. I'm not even sure we looked at this image in that class. But when I got inspired by this image was one that really grew and complicated over time, based on, it's probably the least like what I actually drew. But I knew that I wanted it to be inspired by this, like from the moment that I got the inspiration. And I specifically looked it up to make sure that I was making some key parallels. On this one also actually ended up happening really quickly once I got the inspiration. I knew at some point in this series I wanted to do something that represented Matthew Shepard, and I came upon this image accidentally in some of my personal reading for class. And as soon as I saw this image, I thought, that's Matthew Shepard. And once I realized that, again, I sketched, burned, and painted this in the course of a few hours. And then this one, obviously, is, everybody knows that painting.
Dustin, I love all of them, but the one of Cece, I think is just, there's kind of no words for that one. And
she's definitely the centerpiece of if it were an installation, that's the reason you come to see it, right?
I was just wondering if that one is so remarkable that I wonder if it felt different to you, or how, I'm not sure.
She's
I don't even
actually
know
right
what
here.
to ask. Yeah, I could tell that she was behind you. I could imagine living with her for a very long time.
Yes, and I did, and I lived with her. In fact, when I turned the project in, she wasn't done yet. I submitted a picture of an unfinished work for this for the project. I lived with her for a very long time. She took probably over a month. I was working on her while also getting inspired and doing a whole other piece and then coming back to her, because I wanted her to be perfect. It was kind of like, it was really important to me that she wasn't messed up.
Hey, Dustin, I came in late, but I can't help but love your Last Supper. And I don't know what you said about it, but I mean, obviously it doesn't seem to fit the themes of some of the other images. And so, I mean, I love the Muppets too. So, and Cookie Monster is my hero. So, yeah. What's
the point?
Yeah, exactly. But I love it. I mean, that's fantastic. I want it. I want to live with that picture in my.
A detail that I didn't mention earlier, if you'll notice on the kind of, for lack of a better term, wallpaper behind them, are these like images of coins and money signs, right?
Yeah.
And so the kind of whole point of it was the monetization of Sesame Street and its move to HBO, and how that actually takes away access to the people who need it most.
That makes it even 10 times better.
I love this one too, Dustin, because like it was just before you mentioned that you burned in the HBO letters that I finally saw it, because I was trying to focus on all these little individual dark burnt parts and just being like, well, what is he trying to do? Since this composition for the Last Supper is very obvious, but then there's all these other elements and like, what is going on that's breaking up the space completely unlike the Last Supper. And I love that about the piece, that it's not, like it's obvious, but it's also not, maybe for everyone else it was obvious right away.
No, I didn't see it until you said it.
Okay.
Elizabeth, I have found everybody that I've shown it to me, all I can see is the HBO logo.
Oh, I'm sure.
And I think that, but everybody else says, oh, I just noticed that looks like the HBO logo.
Yeah, but I like that because then it's kind of playing with the Last Supper composition, where you're kind of wondering what's actually happening in this Last Supper scene. Awesome.
I had to, a funny thing that happened was like, as I drew onto the, because obviously I didn't freehand the burning either. I also drew in pencil on the wood so that I wouldn't make a mistake. I started to look at, like, I didn't have Cookie Monster leaning to the left like that, but I realized I was going to completely cover up, like remove his face, which on one hand I thought could be a huge statement, but on the other hand, I felt bad for getting rid of, like, decapitating Cookie Monster. So I leaned him to the left so that a portion of his face would be covered, but not his whole face. I didn't care so much about Zoe, though. She's new. Here.
You may have already said something about this, but I'm just kind of wondering why pyrography, and what inspired you to ask your husband that one night, can you burn wood into designs?
God. I really don't know. It just was divine inspiration is the only thing that I can say. I'd never heard of it before, never saw it, never thought about doing it. And then I was like, I wonder if that's a thing you can do. And then we were off to the races.
Justin, it must be age, because my very favorite toy as a child was a wood burning set. And the tools that you held up were like totally familiar, and you can do all kind, and there's different heads that you can put on the burning tool to have different effects. And it was like, oh yeah, I know exactly what he's up to. But it's because I'm old.
And then I started, after I was like felt very comfortable with the tool, I bought a blowtorch and I started experimenting with what burning with the blowtorch does. And so all of this like negative space was done with a blowtorch, which was really fun because in these deep crevices, the fire would just take off like it was in a tunnel, you know, like a wind tunnel, and just shoot through there until it all got charred, and then you didn't have to blow it out even. It would just extinguish itself.
Can I ask you something about that? Because actually now that Pat has brought back that memory to me, one of the things that I remember most about doing the wood burning is the smell, which was amazing. And
Yeah.
how did that go, fit into your process as well?
I didn't point most of this out, although it is mentioned on these slides, but these are all done on different, so this one's on masonite, this one's on basswood, which is very soft, birch, again, very soft. And then John Lewis is on maple. And so every project smelled different, right? And some of it was unpleasant and some of it was lovely. And that was interesting too. This one, CC, again, I actually burned the whole thing. I took the blowtorch and I wanted it to have a sense of trauma to the picture itself. So even on the edges, like I completely burned the bottoms and the sides so that it looks like it survived a fire.
It just feels like the perfect medium for this project because you're depicting such like confrontational images of violence and pain, and so to have such a like embodied medium feels really appropriate. I guess like something just like the burning of the wood. I don't know, it doesn't feel exactly like, it doesn't feel right to say that it's violent, but it's something that's very like, I don't know, it feels appropriate somehow.
What speaks to me, this wasn't initially my plan, but as I did it, I realized that the burning and the scarring is a thing that can't go away, in the same way that the trauma that you experience, you can overcome it, but it never goes away. And so to kind of use a destructive medium to create something beautiful spoke to that intersection.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just really love that you're saying yes to the like that you got this inspiration and then you investigated it and pursued it and tried it out and like did this whole thing. Like I think, in a medium that you had, didn't know anything about previously and like hadn't tried before, and then to do a whole series in that medium that's new to you is great.
Here's the other thing, like the pyrography, brand new, learned all about it for this. I'm not a visual artist. I've never considered myself a visual artist. I'm a performing artist. And so to have this inspiration was already a little bit anxiety creating, because I'm not a drawer, most of these, I am quite impressed with Ruby Bridges' face. I think that is somehow very realistic and lifelike in some way, and I don't really know how I did that. But most people don't look like a real person, right? I think that's not the kind of artistic ability that I have, but I'm also very impressed with Darnella's face. My own technique there.
But yeah, I also think like that kind of fits in a sense with the, with the references you're making to icons,
right?
And that, yeah, obviously they're human people and recognizable as such and whatever, but they're very stylized and sometimes flattened out in different ways, or those kinds of things. So I think like because that was a direct reference for you, in a way it kind of worked with the
I'm
kind of
glad you
like
said that,
visual
because that's the way
vocabulary.
I justified it in my own mind.
I was gonna say realistic rendering isn't fun anyway, so.
Well, right. I mean, and it's expressive, I think, is like the thing, right? So for a project like this, you know, the point isn't like a kind of, you know, realism or naturalism in the and like that kind of way, but like it's about the, I mean, it's you, I love the title that you picked too for this burning passion. Like I think that it's very expressive. So yeah.
At one point, I thought that it was going to tell, when I chose kind of the burning passion, I thought I was going to order it in a way that told the passion narrative through modern day crucifixions. And then as I, you know, thought more and more about it, I realized, no, I felt like Cece was the central piece that you wanted to see, but it needed to then also be capped off with John Lewis, and that it felt wrong for him to be anywhere but the end, and that kind of ruins the order, and so I had to get over that. But
So are you gonna continue? I hope so.
so my husband wants to know. I said probably, but I needed to take a break for a while. I definitely have some sketches that I haven't realized yet. And I have some ideas that I haven't sketched yet. So there is a possibility of more, or maybe those ideas are actually another technique that I haven't figured out yet.
Well, I have to keep an eye on the time for myself. But any last questions or comments?
I wanted to
Otherwise,
say thank you, Dustin. This was just truly wonderful.
Thank you.
Very inspiring, beautiful, powerful, just amazing.
Thank you.
it's a good example of a successful arts project for for courses too. Of what, although it might be kind of overwhelming to students as an example because you did so much work in, you know, in one semester, but I think it's a helpful example in that way too. Maybe you could talk as by way of a commercial for the future of the arts lunch you'll be giving, like maybe at the end. I don't know if we'll do it at the end of the summer or beginning of the fall.
Yeah, so right now I'm doing an
summer
independent study on theology in the Marvel universe. And I'm specifically taking the Marvel Cinematic Universe as my central focus, both movies and television shows. And for the class, my project is like a Bible study curriculum on Marvel and theology in the Marvel universe. But I'm also going to put together a presentation to do at Arts Lunch for that as well.
So stay tuned. All right. Well, thanks, Dustin, for sharing your work with us, and thanks all for attending. I've yet to line up something for next week, so if anybody has any bright ideas, let me know.
I was laughing when Monday morning came out yesterday. I looked at it and I was like, is this thing happening today, tomorrow, or last week? Because it's got 3 different dates.
It was Max's final last hurrah, I guess. So it was. Yep.